Today, we're going to break down an urgent message, one that was written almost 2,000 years ago to a community that was really on the edge. I mean, they were dealing with persecution, a ton of confusion, a real crisis of faith, and this ancient letter was basically their lifeline. It's a message of encouragement, but also correction, and it has a firm command that honestly still hits home today.
So just imagine for a second, you get a message, and it's from a source you absolutely trust. And it tells you that the final judgment, the end of everything, has already started, and you've been left behind. Can you feel that? That's the terrifying rumor that was just tearing through the ancient city of Thessalonica, and it was causing absolute panic.
So who exactly were the people getting this letter? Well, they were part of a young, super vibrant church. On the inside, their faith was growing like crazy and their love for each other was flourishing. But on the outside, man, they were facing this immense, crushing pressure from every direction.
Okay, so the letter we now call 2 Thessalonians was written by the Apostle Paul to tackle three crises that were all tangled up together. First, you've got this intense persecution from outsiders. Then, that pressure was getting cranked up to 11 by some deep theological confusion about the end times. And that was causing a third crisis, a total breakdown of social order, because some members were just up and quitting their job.
All right, let's dive into that first problem, the persecution. The Thessalonians were really suffering for their faith, and Paul opens his letter by telling them to hang in there, to endure. He tells them, hey, don't look at your suffering as a sign that you're failing. Instead, he says it's powerful evidence that they are worthy of God's kingdom.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. Paul uses this incredible analogy. He says their trials were like putting gold in a fire. The intense heat, right? It doesn't destroy the gold. No, it burns away all the junk, all the impurities, and it reveals how genuine and pure the metal really is. He's telling them their suffering was doing the exact same thing for their faith.
And then he gives them this powerful promise of justice in the future. He assures them that God will one day repay their persecutors and give them, the ones being afflicted, a final peaceful rest. Now, this wasn't just meant to be a nice comfort. It was a rock-solid declaration of hope that in the end, justice was going to win.
Okay, let's get to the real heart of the crisis, a dangerous piece of misinformation. There was this false teaching going around claiming that the great day of the Lord, the time of final judgment, had already started.
This diagram right here does a brilliant job of showing their mistake. See, they believed they were right here, in the middle of what's called the tribulation. They thought they had missed the promised rescue, the rapture, and were now stuck living in the period of God's judgment. You can just imagine the fear and the despair that would cause.
But Paul steps in to correct them. He shows them that they're actually here, still in the time between Christ's first and second coming, what a lot of people call the church age. He explains that the day of the Lord couldn't have possibly started yet because a few key things had to happen first. And here's the crucial point he's making. They had not been forgotten or left behind.
So Paul lays out this super clear sequence. He says, look, before that final day arrives, three things have to happen. First, there's going to be a great rebellion, sometimes called the apostasy. Second, this powerful figure he calls the man of lawlessness will be revealed. And third, some kind of restraining force that's currently holding back evil will be taken away. Since none of that had happened, they could be 100% sure the end had not come yet.
So who is this man of lawlessness? Well, the text describes him as this future world leader who's empowered by Satan, who will oppose God, and who will even set himself up in God's temple demanding to be worshipped. He'll deceive a lot of people with fake signs and wonders. Now, who this figure actually is has been debated for centuries, but Paul's message to the Thessalonians was crystal clear. This is going to be an unmistakable global event. And folks, it hasn't happened yet.
A big part of their confusion was that they were mixing up two different future events, which this table really helps to clarify. So, according to this view, there's an event called the rapture, where Christ comes for the church, meeting them in the air to escape the tribulation. Then, later on, you have the second coming, where he returns with the church to the earth to bring judgment. The Thessalonians were basically taking promises about that final second coming and mistakenly applying them to what they were going through right then.
Now, all this theological confusion wasn't just some abstract debate. It was having very real, very disruptive effects on their daily lives. And that brings us to the third crisis, a breakdown in the community, with some people just stopping work altogether.
To deal with this, Paul gives one of the most direct and honestly startling commands in any of his letters. It is blunt. There is no room for misunderstanding. He says if someone isn't willing to work, they shouldn't be fed by the community.
So why such a harsh rule? Well, it's because some people had taken the false teaching to its logical conclusion. They thought, hey, if the world is ending any second now, why should I bother going to my job? So they became idle. They started living off the generosity of others. And, as Paul points out, they became busybodies, meddling in everyone else's business.
And you know, Paul wasn't just dishing out commands from a distance. He held himself to the exact same standard. He reminds them that when he was actually with them, he and his friends worked with their own hands, night and day, to support themselves. They refused to be a burden on anyone, and in doing so, they set this powerful example of responsibility and discipline.
So when you put it all together, what is the enduring message of this short but incredibly urgent letter? Well, it's this masterful blend of pastoral care, theological correction, and just plain practical instruction.
So to sum it all up, Paul's approach is basically a three-part strategy. First, he commends them. He affirms their incredible faith to build them up. Second, he corrects them. He replaces their fear and confusion with clear, logical truth. And finally, he commands them. He calls the idle members of the community back to their practical duties and reminds them all that faith has to be lived out in the real world.
And that leaves us with a question that feels incredibly relevant for us today. The Thessalonians were destabilized by a single piece of misinformation. We face an avalanche of it every single day. Their story really challenges us. In a world that is so full of confusion and fear, how do we find the right balance? How do we hold on to a deep hope for the future while also living with discipline and responsibility right here, right now?